Thaelen and Emran entered the throne room. Its size was immense, stretching a full 40 meters in length and being 20 meters wide. At the far end, elevated by many steps, within an alcove, stood the throne. There was a great arched window behind the throne, and 2 windows were to be found on either side of the throne and alcove as well. At the moment, the throne stood empty. Elevated walkways ran along the wall. Smooth pillars of black marble rose along the length of the hall, holding up both the walkways and the ceiling above. 2 long tables had been placed within the hall, spanning its length. At the far end, close to the throne, was a 3rd table, spanning the width of the room. Colorful tablecloths had been laid upon them, the textiles embroidered with flowers and suns. Upon the table were silverware, and crystal glasses, and porcelain. He and Emran had been assigned seats not far from the king's high seat. The 75-year-old king was seated there, talking to Duchess Lihon Arinda. Seldom were the 2 cousins together, for Lihon spent most of her time in the city of Le'aid. Not so far away, left of His Majesty, sat Taela. She seemed bored. Some distance away, at the head of the rightmost long table, were seated the various ambassadors and their families. Elores Malem, ambassador of Illyria, sat in discourse with Hazakun, the Asganar ambassador. The elf and the dwarf were good friends, though they oft had heated religious arguments. There was also the Vidric ambassador, the Myric, the Sturic, and Dalian, just to name a few. There also was Opano, the ambassador of Parad, and Pachara's father. Pachara herself was seated next to him. She was dressed in typical Parad clothing, which was strikingly different from the clothing styles of Elrin. A dress with a zigzagging geometric pattern, woven of a fabric native to the tropical island. A headdress with many colorful beads, reds and blues mostly. And she did not wear her typical makeup. In fact, she wore none at all, for traditionally, Parad women did not wear makeup. As Thaelen and Emran approached the king's table, His Majesty looked at them. Both bowed before him, and Emran spoke. "Your Majesty." "Count Evair," the king said, looking at Emran. "Sir Evair." He followed, directing his gaze towards Thaelen. "I welcome you. Please take your seats." Once more they bowed before him, and took their seats, rightwards of the king and his closest kin. Thaelen sat to the right of Emran, who sat to the right of his brother, Count Gihirel. On his left were their father, Thaelen's grandfather, Duke Tahil. On Thaelen's right were seated his cousins. Why he had a seat closer to the king, when his cousins were closer in line to the title of Duke, he didn't know. The eldest, Count Berek, 26 years old, 4 years older than Thaelen, was as he often did, looking at the various women gathered. Whilst he was gazing, he was talking to his younger brother, Count Duarc. Thaelen knew that Duarc had long been interested in Pachara, and had even danced with her on a few occasions. Thaelen's youngest cousin, Gaela, sat at the rightmost end of the table. She was 17 years of age, but already wiser than her two brothers. She was also magically gifted, and was part of the Mage's Guild too. Thaelen found his cousins, with the exception of Gaela, to be rather boring, so he turned his attention elsewhere. He overheard some of the conversation between the king and Duchess Lehon. "Rural, cousin of mine," Lehon began. She was one of the few who could, on such a formal occasion, get away with calling His Majesty by his first name. "Do you not think it is a little too harsh, this tax on the Eastern nobles? They are already not overly happy with your rule." "And what do you want me to do? To turn a blind eye when they question my authority? Their transgressions on my reforms must be dealt with." "I agree with you. But a less severe punishment might be better. Do not give them further reason to rebel." "I've dealt with rebels before." "And what about you, Thaelen? Know anything about it?" Beric said, drawing his attention. "Know anything about what?" Thaelen asked. "The murders, of course. Have you not been listening? The guild was looking into it, I heard." "And why should I know anything about that? I don't have access to the report." Beric gazed at him, then shook his head. "Never been much of a liar, Thaelen. But all right. I'll just wait till the report is made public then." "You will have to wait quite a while for that, Beric," Emran, who had overheard the conversation, said. "His Majesty has ordered it to be confidential until further notice." "Has he? What a shame." Several clings were heard as the king rose from his seat. The room fell silent. "I welcome you, honored guests, to this celebration. Eleva's light shines from the heavens. Her power gives strength. Her love is unending. Today is the longest day of the year, and she is at her highest in the sky. Moreover, it also happens to be a full moon this day. Yes, the celestial sisters are at the zenith of their dance, and Vania's silver glow only strengthens this most holy of days." The old king paused. "Those shorter days are ahead of us. Let us celebrate this, the longest day, and Eleva, whose light shines ever on us." He lifted his glass and toasted them. They applauded him. The speech was short, and barring the mention of Ania, the moon, it was pretty much the same speech he had held for several years. Now servants with trays of silver entered the hall. Foods aplenty were placed on the tables. There were cuts of boar laced with mint sauce, roasted chicken served with mushroom sauce, a trout soup with onion and leek with a hint of lemon, as well as beef seasoned with garlic and sage. There were also many kinds of bread, all filled with fruits and nuts and spiced with exotic spices. Cheese was brought forth, mild Daelian and aged Calirian, and even nutty Belaisian. For drink there was an assortment of kinds, from rich ales to well-bodied wines, from Ithrinic cider to Asganarian whiskey. And as the guests began to feast, musicians began to play. The room echoed with the sound of conversation and discussion. Jesters then entered, going to and fro with jokes and gags. Laughter and merriment filled the space. After the dining was over, it was time for the main dance and some mingling. The guests had all made their way into the chamber to the east of the throne room. It was about 30 by 15 meters, a little over that, in fact. Thaelen. He turned. Standing there was Taela. She wore a red and green dress of velvet. Golden embroidery formed twisting vines and leaves in the fabric. She wore a necklace of gold, in which hung an emerald, and earrings with emeralds also. Her hair was braided. A smile was formed on her lips. A smile that Thaelen returned. "Lady Arinda," he said, and bowed. Her smile vanished. He laughed a little. "May I offer you a dance, Taela?" "I would love to." They moved to the open area. There were already quite a few people moving back and forth there. "You're not the first to have asked me for a dance, though," she said. "Really?" You remember a certain Sir Marl the Care?" He nodded. He remembered the haughty young man who, when they had been 14, had demanded to dance with Taela. She had very sternly refused. "I guess he hasn't given up," Thaelen said. "I hope he gives up when he sees us." "Doubt it, honestly." "He looked at me as if I had cursed him to the nether or something." Poor young de Care, to have been refused by the future Duchess of Lethdon. It must surely have taken a little on his self-perceived importance. She couldn't help herself from laughing. "Come, Taela. Let us cut down his pride a little more." They moved across the ballroom, keeping in rhythm with the music. They gazed into each other's eyes. all of Thaelen's worries about the coming morn were swept away. Pachara stood next to an open window, drinking wine. The dining was over, and now it was time for the dance. She took a sip of the wine. The various nobles moved to the rhythm of the music. The musicians were playing a merry tune on their instruments. They played on lutes and flutes, harps and drums and violins. In their hair were flower crowns of roses and lilacs. She saw a young half-elf with well-combed black hair dance with a younger woman, her hair a vibrant fiery red. The two seemed happy. She took another sip of the wine and directed her attention to the outside. Eleva stood still high in the western sky, painting the city and fields beyond in her glow. Ero'Den's limestone buildings seemed to shine in her light, almost like gold. Pachara faintly caught her reflection on the glass of the window, her own eyes betraying her discontent. "No interest in joining the festivities, Pachara?" She turned her head. Thaelen had walked up to her. He was dressed in a fine but modest suit. "Not really," she answered. "Much more interested in standing here, not participating." "I see." "And you managed to get an invite this year. Interesting, seeing Roral's grudge against you." Duchess Arinda has much sway with her cousin," Thaelen said. The king had little liking for the guild. Its continued desire to act in its own interest was most annoying to him. But many of the nobles were fond of the guild, especially Duchess Lihon, and dismantling it would have been a scandal. Thaelen had become a fixation for his grudge. Precisely why, she didn't know. Perhaps it was that he was a dark elf. Perhaps it was because he was a founding member. "She does indeed," Pachara said. A few seconds passed. "So, tomorrow they'll be off?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. He sighed. "First thing in the morning. I told them to stay away from alcohol tonight." "Thaelen might follow that advice, but I don't think Taela will." "Then she will regret it come morning," he said, chuckling. A few more seconds passed. She drank the final drops in her glass. "Look, Pachara," he began. "If you don't mind, Thaelen, my glass is empty. I should go and have it refilled." She left Thaelen behind. Thaelen yawned. While he hadn't drunk much at all, he had gotten in bed rather late. Taela seemed even more tired. It was 5:40 in the morning, and Eliva had already been up for a full hour. They were standing in the guild's courtyard. The limestone building's western wall was alight with Eliva's golden glow. Their horses were packed and saddled. "We'll soon be off," she said, petting her horse. The mare snorted, but was otherwise silent. She eyed Thaelen. He was talking with Emran. "Is everything packed?" Emran asked for the 4th time. "Yes, father." "Are you sure you have not forgotten anything?" "Yes, I'm sure." "Good." Emran was stalling, not wanting Thaelen to leave. "What about you, Taela?" "Packed and ready to go, Archmage," she answered. Thaelen and Huldra arrived. Thaelen was in deep thought, and Huldra walked in silence beside him. It was always strange to see a blind woman walk about as if she wasn't blind. It had always creeped Taela out a little. As they approached, Emran turned his attention to them. Taela checked her pack once more, just to be sure. As she did, she noticed a glint of something golden from Thaelen's pack. Taela lifted the flap of his pack a little. A glint of gold met her eyes, as well as the sight of a brilliant ruby. It was a sheathed sword. The gilded crossguard was shaped in the likeness of leaves. "Thaelen," she began, "don't you think it's a little conspicuous to bring Isti Agnium with you? This sword has slain demons. It should not gather dust in some panoply or treasury. And if someone was to search through our packs, the average layman wouldn't recognize this blade." Thaelen complained. "Have it your way, Thaelen. But I have a feeling that I'll have to tell you I told you so before this is done." "Are you certain about this, Thaelen?" Emran asked. His question pulled Thaelen and Taela out of their conversation. "I am, though I have no evidence yet. But my instinct tells me that it must be so." "Then we will have work to do," Emran said. "What's going on?" Taela asked. They looked over at Taela and Thaelen. Thaelen sighed. "Last night, Mage Telek was found dead, stabbed. A gruesome sight from what I've heard." Mage Telek had helped Magi Halmar with the report. "It seems that this group has exerted vengeance upon us." But they don't know that we are involved, right?" Thaelen asked. "They shouldn't. Officially, you are going on an expedition eastwards, to the Meironei ruins of Thazail. So they shouldn't know of your involvement in this." "It is time," Huldra said. They looked at her. The old woman's face was neutral, although Thaelen thought that he caught a hint of worry in her expression. "All right," Taela said, and mounted her horse.
"Thaelen,"
Emren said, pausing for a moment.
Come back home, okay?
I will, father." The two embraced. Taela looked at them. Her family had taken farewell of her earlier at the mansion. Even her grandmother, the Duchess of Lethdan, had gotten up early. Lihon was not overly happy that she was going, but believed that Taela, of all people, could handle herself. When Lihon had arrived to Ero'Den for the festivities, she had had a long talk with Emren about Taela's safety. She was, after all, in line, after her father, heiress to Lihon's title and holding. Emren and Thaelen let go of each other, and Thaelen mounted his horse. "Go with the blessings of the gods," Huldra said, "and may fate be kind to you." "Remember," Tevilithan began, "you're dealing with a dangerous group. Be careful. Don't use your real names. And try to be as inconspicuous as you can." "Come back home, Thaelen," Emren said once again. "I will." Then Thaelen and Taela began to ride off. But before they left the guild courtyard, Thaelen turned, and lifting a hand he cried out, "Goodbye, father." "Farewell," Emren called back. He was holding back tears.